Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodons mods. This is Otaku's Showboat and today we will be discussing titanium. If you have been enjoying these tutorials thus far, please be sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you are so inclined, I do stream the Pie Suite on Twitch at twitch.tv/Otaku Showboat, so you can head over there to leave a follow to be notified when I go live on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to approximately 1 p.m. US Eastern Time. You can, of course, do all of the other social stuff through the links below the video, including supporting Pyanodons mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon and myself at patreon.com/Otaku Showboat. So, this is an update to a previous tutorial where I showed the entire chain for titanium, as I have been updating several of the other ore processing setups thus far. Titanium, though, has undergone very recently a rather big change at the green science level. So, speaking of science, we will begin with the sciences. So, if I look for titanium, titanium processing stage 1, once you are at red science, noting that before red science you just throw the ore into a furnace, it will give you through the grade 1 with a 50% chance of grade 2. It will take your grade 2 to grade 1. It'll give you some rejects to get into grade 3. Your grade 1 will become grade 3 with those rejects, and you can make plates out of grade 3. So the first step is up to grade 3. The second, tech, will give you a few options. It'll give you plates from grade 4 titanium. It will also give you the molten titanium recipes, the first of the molten titanium recipes, and this is what is now different at Green Science. Previously, you could only make your way up to titanium enriched dust, but this had a little bit of a problem associated with it in that you had this pulp 3 that you would end up with, or yeah, this titanium pulp stage 3 that you couldn't do anything with at this science level by processing your grade 4. So what has been changed is now you have a means to process that pulp stage 3 into useful things. So you can take that pulp stage 3, make the purified titanium pulp, and now this overflow waste is your waste product until you can do something with it at Blue Science. And you can go all the way up to concentrated titanium now out of that. So yeah, that's the biggest thing, is now Green Science goes all the way up to concentrated titanium. There's also been another major change in that the jig that is required to do this recipe here, this one is done in the jig. It's no recipe category on this tooltip. Under that debug, that first powdered titanium debug thing says recipe category jig. So this is in the jig. The jig previously required both the electric engine units as well as circuit 2s, which electric engine units only unlocked at Blue Science, and circuit 2s meant that you are basically at Blue Science. This is chemical science packs, obviously. So it really pushed when you could actually do molten titanium, because even though you unlocked a molten titanium recipe at Green Science, you couldn't do it until Blue because it needed the jig. The jig has now been updated to require circuit 1s and basic normal engine units, so you can now make the jig at Green Science for this process, which is fantastic, and for any other earlier processes where that may have applied too. So that does change a pretty significant amount of stuff overall by having that access to the jig a little bit earlier. And it definitely makes this going down into. However, the jig still requires stainless steel, which does push back the timing a little bit to a bit later in green science. It actually gives you a reason to go into stainless steel earlier, which is fine. I am okay with that design decision. Now at level 3, at chemical science packs, we will get access to the various steps to get into high grade titanium out of concentrated. A lot of this is the processing of that waste pulp. Like a lot of this ends up being processing of waste pulp, as well as further processing of titanium enriched dust. So the titanium enriched dust, there's two endpoints here. Just to clarify, there's the titanium enriched dust into molten at Green Science, and you do the concentrated titanium into molten. You do both of these things, and the combined molten into plates is what you have to work with at this point. Now the blue science goes up to high grade. It processes the enriched dust as well as that overflow waste into additional concentrated this stuff, the powder, the powder into the concentrated titanium, and all of that adds up into the high grade stuff. It gives lots. It gives lots. You also unlock the niobium titanium alloy from molten recipe at titanium stage 3. So note, you'll probably want to be doing this if you're using plenty of this alloy. It's a pretty expensive alloy because it is niobium complex, but it's always going to be worth your while going into the molten alloy steps as opposed to the solid alloy steps. Now, of course, at Utility Science, you also get access to the reduction and sintering. They are tied together, just like the majority of the other ore processing setups. So now let's have a look at this in Hellnod. So, in Hellnod, step 1 at pre-Red Science, all you can do is just cast it in standard little stone furnaces. That's all you really need to do is just throw it into stone furnaces, and you'll get the titanium plates. Now, it is at this point that I will note that getting 15 early on is going to be rather difficult, and you will never actually really do this, right? You'll never really consider doing this exactly as is, because you're not going to be able to get titanium until you have acetylene. And acetylene is going to require buildings that you have access to at Red Science. So there is a reason I don't have this at Stone Furnaces, and I have this at Advanced Foundries, because you will absolutely 100% guaranteed have Advanced Foundries in a standard Pi game when you get titanium ore. In a standard Pi game, you will always have the Advanced Foundry access to get your titanium ore, because they need acetylene to mine, and acetylene is a lot of coke. It's a lot of coke. It's lime for the coke. You have to make this carbonate out of lime, and yeah, it's just lots of coke, but you can have a pretty compact setup to make acetylene overall, just as long as you can feed it enough fuel in the form of the coke to keep going. So that is the first initial thing that you get access to, but you get access to the red science stuff because you'll have the buildings anyway. So realistically, the first thing that you can do is this, all the way up to grade 3 processing of titanium. So this is what you will rely on, generally speaking, at Red Science, is the processing of the ore in a screener into grade 1 and grade 2. That will then get jaw crushed, the grade 2 into the grade 1, additional grade 1. So here, an example of where we actually go backwards, and then we jump ahead, because we will then screen the grade 1 into grade 3 as well as rejects, and then the rejects get a secondary crusher back into grade 3, additional grade 3 here. And then all the grade 3 can get directly cast in a foundry or whatever else, even stone furnaces will do it, into your plates. Now, I will note, titanium, while it used to not be used in very high volume, and isn't used at very high volume at red science itself, it will be used in relatively high volume going into green science because you need titanium to make cages for animals. If when you're using Pi Alien Life, you need titanium for cages. You also need titanium to get the bio containers for your biological samples that you mine, the mineable resource for the biological samples. And yeah, the containers are what is rather expensive on the titanium. It's titanium and a whole bunch of other stuff, which will very much be the limiting factor with getting those biological samples. Uh, you also need titanium to make rubber because you need the polybutadiene for the rubber, and that is out of titanium and aromatics. If I actually do a search for polybutadiene, we can see that in here by product. Polybutadiene, it is titanium plates, aromatics, and water. There you go. There's your titanium. Just to check my memory here. Yes, that is the thing. You will need this for rubber, no matter what. Like every rubber recipe uses the polybutadiene, which means you are spending titanium to make rubber always. From here in titanium, we get into the green science steps. At the beginning of green science, it may be worth your while to expand your setup by one additional step to turn your grade 3 into titanium grade 4 by throwing it into ball mills and then casting that grade 4. The difference is an extra plate, just shy of an extra plate per second at 15 or in. Later on, when you get access to the jig, you then get access to this mess at Green Science. This, I think, makes titanium the most complex at Green Science of any of the ore processing setups at this current moment in time. However, to get into this, you do need stainless steel for the jig. That's the big limiting factor, stainless steel for the jig. To do the grade 4 processing, you also need this stuff called MIBC, or methyl isobutyl carbonyl. This stuff is made out of copper plates, petroleum gas, and acetone. We saw this in the tin processing update video, and tin processing in general. It's only used in tin and titanium processing, so do bear that in mind. It is used more in tin than here, though, but still existent amounts, not trace amounts. A little bit, I would consider this a bit more than a trace amount of stuff. So you need to have some capacity of making petroleum gas as well as acetone, and of course the copper to make this stuff. Which acetone depends on how you get it. Not particularly cheap. It's a pretty big setup. Like it's a bit of space to make acetone, and it's a bit of space for the petroleum gas as well because you do not have access to vanilla oil refining anymore. That is another big difference between the previous set of tutorials and this set of updated tutorials, is that there is no more access to the vanilla game's oil cracking, basically. So you can't make heavy oil from crude oil through the vanilla oil refinery anymore, and you can't take that heavy oil and make it into light and the light into petroleum gas through the vanilla oil refinery recipes. There are different specialized recipes in the desulfurizator building that will allow you to convert heavy to light to petroleum gas at a cost that they like basically have the amounts each step and give you sulfur that you have to deal with. That's one of the ways. There's plenty of ways of getting petroleum gas. We're not going to go into all of them here, just like there's two ways to get acetone that we aren't going to really discuss here at this moment in time. Just know that there is a dedicated acetone recipe that's a bit expensive, and there's the recipe that's from phenol. Uh, but I would only suggest that phenol recipe if you get access to the distillates cumene recipe for it and not use the phosphoric acid cumene process, which is not nice to say the least. You want to conserve your phosphoric acid and not use it for this acetone and phenol and such. But you only get access to that at Blue Science, which is why I'm saying here that this acetone is pretty expensive at Green, because that dedicated acetone recipe is also not kind. It uses chromite sand, basically, which makes it not very kind either. From here, so from this jig step, I think that's about what we'll discuss here on that matter. I will note that previously, when you could only process this titanium-enriched dust into molten, the amount of plates that you got without hot air plate processing was less than what you would get out of grade 4 casting. So this grade 4 casting 3.8 with hot air, the casting of the molten out of enriched dust is 3.9. That's with the 25% bonus by using hot air. So it was objectively less than the grade 4 output in plates if you weren't using hot air, which was not ideal. So now we still have that 3.9-ish by hot air casting this 15.6, but we also have the ability to process this at pulp stage 3. Note here that you get rejects that gets more grade 4, so I have the matrix solver on there. But really here it's this pulp 3 that we will be processing here in a leaching station with sulfuric acid. So we need to now also add sulfuric acid, and do note that in order to actually cast this stuff into molten, or melt this stuff into molten, I should say, in the foundries, you will need heavy oil. That's the main new component here. You will need heavy oil, but chances are you already have heavy oil if you have petroleum gas. Like if you went through that effort, you probably know how to get the heavy oil by now. And you can crack crude oil into heavy oil directly with by adding steam in a steam cracker building. That is the pie way of getting heavy oil. So that is relatively insignificant. The sulfuric acid, though, not as insignificant, depending on how you get it, especially at green science. This can be a little bit problematic at green, although you do need sulfuric acid to get into your circuit 2s eventually. So this is a necessary thing that you're going to make, no matter what, at this phase of the game. Just making a bit more to feed into titanium is actually very valuable, because this whole process here dramatically increases the amount of plates that you have access to. Now, from here, this makes purified pulp and this overflow waste. The overflow waste you cannot do anything with until the next level of science, so for now you will need to void it or store it or do something else to make sure that it's not hindering the further processing. The pulp, purified pulp, will directly evaporate into the high-grade powder that you can then solid separate to get concentrated, as well as a little tiny bit of raw nextlet, as well as iron oxide. Just a little bit of these two as byproducts. Use them, don't use them, doesn't matter. Just they need to be removed at all times. Same with the stone all the way back up here. They're just byproducts. You need to get rid of them, and that gravel there too. You need to just get rid of all the byproducts, and then that can get melted down into more molten titanium, significantly more molten titanium, with significantly less heavy oil. Bear that in mind too. And then you can cast it into plates. Lots and lots and lots and lots of plates. Without hot air, I will note that this is exactly 15, so this is an 18.75 quantity, not an 18.8, but 18.75 by adding hot air, which makes it a 1-to-1 without hot air of ore into plates at this level of green science, which is about on par with all of the other processing setups for this phase. It's the average. It's the average. It's perfectly 1-to-1 without hot air, and then the hot air just adds 25% to the plates that you get out from it. Makes it a little bit more logistically challenging until you get access to your uh, red belts. But because the jig is stainless steel, chances are you have access to advanced small parts by now, and therefore have red belts. Because stainless steel equals advanced small parts equals red belts at green science anyway. That's the standard progression at green science. Now, the next processing is, of course, going to be the processing of the enriched dust, as well as the overflow waste. We're still stopping, though, at the concentrated titanium just to get a sense for the difference in outputs once you get into blue science. So once you get into blue science, it is time to process our enriched dust and that waste. So the enriched dust, you have to hydroclassify with sodium chlorate, which is salt and steam at 165 C, standard temperature steam, with a little bit of water into pulp 1. You will also need grease. Glorious, beautiful, wonderful grease. However you want to get grease. In a grease table to convert that pulp 1 into titanium residue as well as pulp 2. Now, the pulp 2, by adding filtration media and more grease in a grease table, will make pulp 3, which that pulp 3 gets added into here. See that pulp 3, they get added together, and then that's additional pulp 3 that we already have processing from that previous step. Now the residue gets processed in a hydrocyclone into grade 4 that loops back, as well as pulp 5. Pulp 5 will need kerosene, so make sure you have an idea of what kerosene recipe you would like to use. Lots of options there. Into pulp 6 in a centrifugal pan. Then the agitator will agitate pulp 6 with slaked lime, glorious slaked lime, which is just lime and water, which is, just lime is limestone and coke. Into a solution stage 1. Then the solution stage 1 will get flotation celled with a bit of sulfuric acid and pressurized air into solution stage 2. That gets flotation celled again with alamac. Alamac is oleochemicals and aromatics. By this phase of the game, you should have access to both of these. You should have a solution to both of them. Into titanium overflow waste, which we have seen before, this overflow waste. Now, all of that grade 3 from way back here, from here and here, these two steps, we'll now need a bit more sulfuric acid because we have a bit more pulp to process into the purified pulp and overflow waste. Now we know what to do with this purified pulp. It gets evaporated into powder and then solid separated into concentrated. The overflow waste can now get processed in a thickener into a pulp stage 4 that then will need to get filtered with biofilm that you have had access to for a while in the game. into a purified titanium pulp. More purified titanium pulp that gets evaporated. Just combining these two pipes together to get into an evaporator to solid sep, and then you have a bunch more molten titanium to work with, and you end up with a lot of plates. A lot of plates for 15 ore in. Is this worth doing? Abso-freaking-lutely, this is worth doing. But it's not everything that you have access to at Blue Science, because at Blue Science you also get access to an additional step where you can electrolyze that concentrated titanium by adding graphite and aluminium plates into high-grade titanium plates, or titanium, that will then make even more molten to make even more plates. Now, the difference here between 61.4 and 72.2 is rather significant. That's practically 11 plates. That's nearly 11 more plates. Is it worth the one aluminium plate? Absolutely, it's worth the one aluminium plate to get nearly plus 11 titanium plates for your per 15 titanium ore. That's absolutely going to be worth it, but that is a ton of hot air. Like, that is the one downside here, is that these processes use significantly more hot air. So this would be the point in time where you really need to be considering some sort of a dedicated massive hot air build at this Blue Science level, most specifically. You will need something really dedicated for hot air. Now, what I have done here, our next step is the first step of utility. That is here. Utility science adds reduction and sintering, and you could do reduction, or you can do sintering, or you can do reduction into sintering, or you can sinter the high grade. I have been ignoring this entire time the sintering of high grade. It's worthless. Don't do it ever. There's no point. It's never going to be worth sintering high grade. Reduce the high grade and then sinter the reduced to double the output by comparison. So, at utility science, where we are laughing about all of our resource production capabilities, you will need a direct reduction plant, which will require circuit 3s, as well as sodium sulfate and diesel. This is the standard reduction setup. This is standard at this point. Most reduction is going to require diesel and sodium sulfate with pressured air. Add that with limestone and a whole bunch of heavy oil, and sand castings, of course, to get a bunch of molten for a bunch of plates. However, 72.2 versus 78.2 is not a significant percentage increase by just doing reduction, which is why you also have access to sintering, which is one extra step that adds lime and syngas and a solid fuel of some description, or pressurized air. Lime, syngas, a solid fuel, and pressured air. That's the standard sintering process. That is always worth doing. You have access to these like on demand for the lime anywhere. You have access to coke, as well as syngas anywhere you have access to some tar. So you have these in large amounts, large quantities of both of these things by now, as well as large quantities of any solid fuel. Any solid fuel for the sinter plant. You can, in Hellmod, set what type of fuel you want to use, by the way, through this resource menu here. Then the sintered gets processed the same way we have been doing all along thus far into an absolute ton of molten that casts into 96.2. Bear in mind, you'll want some spare molten for other alloys that use titanium, particularly the niobium titanium alloy. Note this is 192.4 hot air per 15 ore that you are processing, and you might be processing more than 15 ore. Will you need more than 96.2 in a late game base? I don't think so. At least not at the amount of ore that you'd be processing. So would it be worth processing like 5 yellow belts, 75 units of titanium ore into the literal hundreds of titanium plates that would make? Maybe not. Maybe not. There comes a point. There comes a point where you don't need 481 titanium plates by processing 75 ore. Yeah, you most likely don't really need all that much to at least finish the game. The only times where you will be thinking in values this high is if you have some high production goal for science overall, some late game mega base production goal for those of us who are absolutely insane and have nothing better to do with our lives. So with that, that is the titanium processing chain for every single step of tech along the way. With that, I would like to very much thank you all for watching. If you have been enjoying these videos thus far, please be sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you are so inclined, I do stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/Otaku Showboat, so you can head on over there to leave a follow to be notified when I go live Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to approximately 1 p.m. US Eastern Time. You can do all of the social stuff through the links below the video, including getting access to this production line in Hellmod via the text string available on my Discord, linked below. You can support Pyanodon's mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon and myself at patreon.com/Otaku Showboat. I will, of course, be back next time where we are going to discuss lead. I will see you all on the next one.